Yes, the relationships still are pending. The topic is not complete yet.
No,
Right.
I was talking about, I think, just a second, I'll just pull it up. So I think cross references and was something that was left out.
Yeah. So
That's
that's basically the relationships. So there are
oh,
three types of references.
okay,
So we call them as relationships as well.
okay.
So that's one topic which is still pending. But yeah, I mean that's I mean it's a little advanced topic. I thought first let's understand the core part of the use case, and then we'll look at the relationships.
When we find like, there is a gap, we have done a gap analysis, then how do we proceed? To whom we should tell like, there is a gap found, or like, how we
Right.
report about it?
Now that's see that the broadly we have these two projects. One is a process modeling. We call that as a process modeling or business process engineering, and the other one is a new system development. So typical new system development will follow the process what we are learning, right? Now the process modeling would primarily have these three phases, right? So first we understand how the current system is working, right? So we will use a reverse engineering technique, and then uh, observation technique and whatever, and then we would document the current process as it is. As this process is like this, so we'll list that down. That's the first section, right? And then we would figure out, okay, so obviously there would be some pain points or opportunities to in the current way we are doing things. Okay, so there would be another section listing out that. Okay, then you would come up with your final section which says what your to be model or your future state should be, which would address those gaps, right? So again, the future state can also be represented using the use case diagram and all, right? So if I have to answer your question, the first there would be additional two sections in the case where you're trying to improvise a system. So first you will document the current system, the way it is working. Then you'll find out what are the pain points in it, right? And then go ahead with your final solution, which will list down how you would improvise and then address those gaps. Okay. So when I talk about the BRDs, I would cover that. Okay. So that's another thing which you have to look at. So most of the times the process modeling and all we do using the flow charts and swim lanes and all. So we'll cover those topics as well. Okay, so that's still is pending. We have not covered all ways of documenting the requirements.
Okay.
Okay, the primary way of illustrations would be reverse engineering and observation technique for the gap analysis kind of problems. Right, so you're trying to understand how it works. All right, let's start the question session today. Like we plan to have a discussion on the interviews and see how should we prepare for the interviews. Right. So let's go topic by topic. What kind of interview questions could come in? So this also, would be the way you would have contributed in right from the start of the project till yes, you've documented, right? Now I'll only ask the questions from where we have already covered them. Okay, already the topics that are already covered. Okay, uh, the rest of them, I mean, once we complete the whole course, then we'll have another mock interview kind of session where I'll ask the questions from the rest of the topics as well. Okay. So again, feel free to answer. I'll just pose the question and then take initiatives to answer. Right. So don't fear that okay, is my answer right or wrong, and don't worry about it. Right. So we are all here to learn, and nobody is going to judge anybody. Right. So the more actively you participate, the more benefit you would get. Okay. So look at it that way, rather than just be a passive listener. Okay. See again, most of your interviews would be mostly practical oriented rather than theoretical, right? So nobody is going to test your theoretical understanding or your definitions of a particular topic. Like nobody is going to ask you what is traceability or what is RSA matrix, or what is a use case, right? So these kind of questions would be very rare. Okay, you may still get it, but I would say, a significant lot of the interviewers would want to understand, how is it practically used, right? So, conceptually you're good, but have you applied that and practically used it? So that is what they would test. Okay, and since you'll all be putting a lot experience, right? So a lot of your questions would be based on the resumes that you put in. Right? So the questions would be like, how did you gather the requirements for this project? Okay, so it would be that way. Okay, and now you have to build a story. You have to clearly understand how what would be the process for your which you've used for your requirements, the approach step by step. Like, we started out by reading these documents, and then so most of your questions would be like that. So don't expect that there would be questions on this concept and they would ask me definitions. Right? So that would rarely happen. Okay, and nobody is going to ask you definitions. Right? So it's just your understanding of the topic is what they would look at. Okay. So having said that, so today's session, since we're not going specific to your resume, we'll broadly understand or try to understand what kind of questions would come in and what and then we'll look at how to respond to them as well. Okay? Again, but when you get your resume, it has to be specific to your resume. You have to pick up some project and then say, in this project we did it in this way. So that's how your responses should be. Okay. The other thing what I would say is, see, when you're attending the interviews, if you preferably it's over the telephone, right? Record the interview, or at least take notes of what questions are coming. Okay, so you might not convert the first interview. Okay, that's still okay. But the moment you start capturing your questions, right? So your first interview, second interview, make sure that you cover or document all your questions. So you'll have your own specific database of questions which will be asked for your resume. Okay, and a lot of those questions tend to repeat. So since your resume would be there, would be the same for all the interviews. Questions tend to repeat. Okay, so even if like 50-60% of the questions repeat, and you are prepared for those questions in the next interview, right? Now there's a very good chance of conversion, right? So consciously make sure that you capture all your questions, and then be prepared for the next interview for those questions, right? So that's one advice would definitely be helpful. So just don't forget about once the interview is over, stop thinking about it, right? So make sure that you put in that effort, even for at later stage as well, when you want to apply for other jobs, right? So this would definitely be helpful. So put those list of questions which are specific to your resume, right? What kind of questions are being asked on the resume? So they tend to repeat. The second advice is, go through the job description clearly. Right? So there would be a lot of hints on what kind of questions you could get by looking at the job description. Because see, they're looking for a specific requirement. Okay, so they will clearly call out, this is what exactly I want, right? So if you can ensure that you cover all that experience, all that skill set that you have, which meets those requirements, which meets the job description, there would be a good chance of conversion again. Okay, so ensure that you do these two things when you're preparing for interviews. Make sure you list down your questions, and then be prepared for that interview by looking at the job description on what kind of requirements are this guy asking, right? So some of them specifically ask about, I want good experience in use cases and UML. So the project could be in a waterfall model. So all he is interested in a waterfall, right? So there could be some project in agile mode. So this guy would say, no, I want the user stories to be. I want the BA to be an expert in user stories, right? So you'd get that clarity. Okay, what topic is a focus to be on, right? And what topic I should be well prepared. Right, so you'll get pointers. Then they could also ask, you should have a basic understanding of Visual, right, or some other open tool as well, if they would say. You can be prepared for those as well. Right? It won't take much time. Maybe a few minutes on YouTube, you get to learn those tools. Right? So the conceptually, if you understand a use case, it's drawing it is not a big deal. Right? It will take you 5 minutes, be it in Word, PowerPoint, or Visio. It won't take. Right? But it will give you that confidence. The moment you look at what kind of tools they're asking, and then you're prepared for them, you'll be in a much better position to answer that. Okay. So that's some guidelines on cracking your interviews. So let's look at each topic and then see what kind of questions would come in, and how you should answer. Right. So first session I talked about the industry overview and the SDLC types. Right. So there could be broad questions on how was your team structured, or which team are you in, right? So broadly this question would be on whether you are part of the client. There are two ways in which you could go as a business analyst. You're part of the client team itself, or you're part of a IT services company. Like you could be with IBM, or you could directly be with let's say Walmart. Okay, so either way you could work as a business analyst. So there could be broadly questions on who are you reporting to, and how was the team structured, which team are you in, right? And so there could be questions on that, right? And this would be a very specific question. So I hope you guys are taking notes of the questions, right? So please do that, because it will help you once you put in your resume. You could get that clarity on how you are going to respond to those questions. Okay. Since you have a question,
can you please repeat the question?
Yeah. So broadly they would want to understand how is your team structured. So you would ask who are you reporting to, or what is the current team structure, right? So so there are broadly two ways, right? So you're either part of a services company. You would say I was as part of this IBM, and then I was onboarded onto this project, and started off with this, with the project planning and all that, right? But in case you're with the customer, right? So that ideally, there's a good chance that you could be hired directly by the client. Okay, so some of the organizations have the business analyst in house. Those kind of situations, you would report in. You would be part of the dev team, or so, or a business development, business analyst team, which would work out on the in-house projects, right? The broad question could be on how is your team structure, or who are you reporting to, and all that. Okay. The other questions which would come in would be they could pick up a project from your resume and then say how was this executed. So, you'll have to again look at your, specifically say whether it's a waterfall model, or was it an iterative model, right? Or was it a agile project? So they would want to understand your, whether you gather the difference between these projects, right? So when you get a kind of question like this, like, how was this project executed, right? Or how would you deliver this? How was this project delivered? Right? So they primarily want to know how the project was executed, right? So they won't ask you, tell me what is a waterfall model, or tell me a iterative model. So those kind of questions will not come in. Okay. So look at your resume, pick up a project, and then say, okay, I'll say that this has executed in a waterfall, or this as an iterative, and then it has 2 phases or 3 phases, and then each phase had this scope, right? So you'll have to bring out that knowledge when you're responding to your questions. Okay. So a lot of would be application oriented. That's the reason I'm not directly posing questions or asking questions to you. It won't be testing your theoretical knowledge. Right? So a lot of them would not ask, explain me what is iterative model, right? Though conceptually you should understand to explain it to answer that question from an interviewer. He would ask you, how did you execute this project? You have to say, it's a iterative prototyping model. We worked in multiple phases, and each phase I've also used prototyping, right? So then you know. So those are the kind of questions it should have. So broadly, he would like to understand your team structure. He would like to understand how the projects was executed, right? So those we have understood in the part one of the course. Okay. So those two, I think, are the primary kind of questions I expect from an interviewer. Again, conceptually, they will not check your knowledge, right? So they'll want to link it to your projects and then ask.
The thing is, like, I wanted you to take the interviews for all of these guys.
So
You can ask them the simple questions, whatever you've been thinking for so many days. So
right, Manju.
pick up the topic from there.
Yeah. Now, there are two ways to look at it, Manju. Now, they're not going to ask the questions directly on particular topic, like tell me waterfall model, right? So while that would be there, I'll ask those questions. I'm clearly telling them this is how the questions would come in, and then I'll spend some time asking questions as well, right? So I'll definitely make sure that. But this is more like guiding them on how to crack the interviews as well as then taking the interview. So it will help them understand what kind of questions they would expect in the interviews.
I can understand that thing, but the only thing what I wanted from from all my employees was they need to know the whole concept what you taught for so many days. So whatever topic you get through, we want to make sure that these guys understood it. It doesn't matter. You are asking the same question to everyone. I just want to figure out that everyone knows this, the answer for a simple whatever you thought before. So.
Yeah. So that's right, Manju. But see, I can ask some questions, but it should be relevant also, right? I mean, later on when they actually go for interviews, they should have a clarity on what kind of questions they would expect, right? So that's a context which I'm giving. And let me ask a few questions as well on each topic, and I'll do that.
Yeah.
But I thought each topic wise, I'm trying to summarize what kind of questions that they would expect, and then conceptually also I'll test them. Okay. So since you've asked that, I'll ensure that it will conceptually also.
Okay. Sure. Thanks.
Yeah. So the first part, I think broadly you'll get those questions. They will try to understand the team structure and then the kind of projects that you have worked on, the kind of SDLC models.
What Manjur is trying to say here is like, if they are clear with the concept, then they can relate it to their project.
Yeah, I get that, Pooja. I get that.
Yeah, so that's why he's saying, like, he's insisting that you should ask questions.
Right. So, let me ask questions. I'll leave it to you who wants to answer. I won't pick people. So unless anybody of answer, if I don't get any response, then maybe I'll pick somebody. But it's open. I mean, don't hold back. You can answer questions. Let me start with the first one, right? So I think right. So what is an SOW?
SOW is your document which tells what to do.
SOW statement of work is a high-level document which will just portray in few lines that exactly what the client is expecting to do.
Right. Yeah. Broadly, all of you are right. So just use this term scope, right? So it basically tells at a high level what the client wants to do, right? So it's basically SOW is the other thing what you need to mention is the two key things. One is it's a contractual document, right? So it's a legal document. So both the parties sign off on it, and so it's contractually binding. That this is what has to be delivered, and both the parties agree that these are the activities and this is the scope that has to be delivered. Okay. So broadly, yes, what you have mentioned is the client tells us what needs to be done, and that is there. But use that term. It captures the exact scope and the various aspects of the project, like the timelines, the cost, and all that, right? And it's a legal document, contractual, not legal. Call it as a contractual document. Talk about the various types of SDLC models, right? Now, what is the difference between a waterfall and an iterative model?
Can tell about waterfall. And waterfall, it is a non-iterative life cycle. That is like, something which gets compiled once and it does not break the project into multiple pieces. It is the oldest and simplest way of implementing any software development life cycle because, here it requires high amount of documentation, and documentation is essential part of the year. And the main disadvantage of waterfall model is like the client, he has very low visibility, almost none in terms of what has been developed till the very end or the actual product comes out. So
what are the phases of a typical waterfall model?
Waterfall model, it starts with project initiation, then requirement definition, then it has been followed by the design phase, building phase, then the testing, implementation, and then the maintenance. We cannot go reverse back in the waterfall model.
No, it's not like that. It's not that you cannot go back. Maybe it would be a little more. You'll have to spend a little more effort, right? So it's not like we cannot add additional requirements later.
Yeah.
It's just that model would not be effective in that kind of scenario, right?
Right.
So it's the simplest model. The waterfall is the simplest model, right? It has a And when do you use a waterfall model?
When there are short terms of project, probably uses waterfall model, or the client will have a proper visibility as what he wants, and the requirements should get frozen, a solid baseline. That time we can use the waterfall model.
Yeah, let's do a round robin because all of them should get a chance, right? So I'll start off with Akhil. Let's go one by one because we're having multiple people talk. So when do you use an iterative model?
Iterative model, the main aspect of it is that the phases are in itself. So, for example, in waterfall, there's one big phase which starts from the initiation process to the end of the project. But in iterative model, each phase in itself is its own existence, and we generally use it when the timeline is much longer, and the users use it after each iteration.
Right. Good. So basically, if you'll have a long project, like if it's a big, the scope is too large that it might take some 2-3 years. You break it down into pieces and then work in phases. Each phase would deliver some functionality, and the advantage is that you'll have something to use much earlier. So maybe at the end of 6 months or 4 months or so, right? So that's the advantage of an iterative model. Okay. What is prototyping?
Prototyping is providing a diagram or a representation of what a final system would look like. So the features won't be active, but it gives a framework like how the final system would look.
Okay. So good response. You should also answer about when do you use prototyping and what is the advantage. So let me pose another question, follow-up question, right? When is prototyping? Did you use any prototyping for any of the projects? If so, in what context? Okay. So why would you use prototyping?
We use prototyping because to show our customer that how would be his final outcome, or prototyping is nothing but an example that this will be your website or your application will look like. It could be a drawing, it could be drawing in a paper or in a paint, or it could be also be a example of it with the help of a designer.
Prototyping is basically a visual representation of a UI. of a UI for the customers to understand like how the system will actually look like?
Right. I think, yeah, broadly you guys are clear about that. I think Syed, Avi, and Pooja, all three of you are more or less clear on why we are using prototyping and all. Right. Tell me the types of prototyping. So tell me the difference between a throwaway prototype and a difference between a throwaway prototype and an evolutionary prototype. So the name itself, I think, is giving you indication of what it means. Right? Or the question could be, where do you use a throwaway prototype? Have you created throwaway prototypes or evolutionary prototypes? Right. So these are the various kind of questions which should come. So they might pick up a project and then say, how did you execute this project? Throwaway prototype or was it an evolutionary? Or do you know the difference between them?
So what I think, I'm not exactly sure, but a prototyping would be they build up a prototype in the first phase and then they stick to it right till the end. And the other one was, what was that?
Evolutionary.
Evolutionary would be basically they make a prototype and then they actually add features to it eventually and keep showing it to the customer. And then
Can I try this?
Yeah.
The throwaway prototype, it is like it is a kind of a model which will be eventually be discarded rather than becoming a part of the actual final software. We'll just use it. I mean, it will be just basic for the basic level. We'll be using it, and then later it will be discarded. The throwaway model. Whereas if you talk about the evolutionary prototype, it is to build a very robust prototype in a structured manner. And then we keep on constantly refining it. Like for example, if we are building up a website, so a developer might assist a BA, and then we would be building a UI, and then constantly we will be refining it in a structured manner. That is evolutionary prototype.
Right. So broadly, a throwaway prototype is basically is used to get a common understanding with the customer. Right. So if I show you this is nothing but a throwaway prototype. Why? Because the only thing I've used for drawing this is because I want to get the same understanding. I want the customer also to have the same understanding of how the system looks like. Right. Now after the customer says, okay, I'm good with this. Right. So this is of this is of not much use to me. Right. I have to start the design process right from the fresh. Right. So maybe I have to create that UI, screen using HTML and all. Right. So all the work that I have put in drawing this would be discarded, would be thrown away. So that's the reason it's called as a throwaway prototype. So like Rupani, you mentioned it, you're right on that front. Right. And in some cases, you want to have an exact view of how the final system would look like. So what do? You'll engage a developer right at the start, a UI developer, and then you'll ask him to create those screens, right? So effectively, you're creating the screens right up front during the design phase itself. And once the customer says, I'm good with it, you'll actually use those screens also. You don't have to redevelop it, right? So that would be your evolutionary prototype. Since your requirements, that prototype is evolving into the final product, it's called as an evolutionary prototype. You get the difference now, right? So that's another question which would come in on prototypes. So be prepared as that. Right. So I think you have that broad understanding, but the refinement is needed when you are answering the question. Okay. So what is the advantage of a prototype? I think we covered that question. Right, so you guys answered. Whenever there is ambiguity or the customer is not clear about, how the final system looks like, you tend to go for a prototype. We did cover it, right? Spiral, we can ignore, there won't be any questions, right? So when do you go for products, or how would you figure out whether you have to develop it in-house or you should implement a product. The question is, basically they would want to understand when would you use this product implementations, right? broadly, the kind of context would be when let's say you're applying for and most of the times these questions would come in if you're working at the client location, right? A client wants to hire a business analyst directly, right? So they want to understand how would you figure out how to execute this project, right? So should we, looking at that broader requirement, you would want to understand whether you're going to suggest to develop this in-house, or you're going to suggest buying a product and then implement it, right? So that's a broad reason why this question could come. Okay. Now, when do you go for a product implementation and when do you go for a in-house development? So that's the question which is, right? So should you go for a waterfall and then develop it yourself, or would you go for a product? I would want each one of you to answer the same question, even though it's repeating and all. I'll ask the same question. Make sure that each one of you answer one after the other, right? So that's how we work with this. I don't want to pick one and then the rest of it will be quiet. Right? Each one of them should answer the questions. Okay. Let's move on to the next topic and on the requirements planning exercise. Okay. So specifically, tell me what is what is traceability? What is traceability?
Traceability would be basically, it gives you understand. It's a flow chart, not a flow chart, but it's basically gives you understanding of what projects is going to be depending on another project and what when is it going to get finished. For example, if one part of the project is getting finished, and it depends on a previous project that has to be finished for this project.
I would say project, say it as requirement. I think it's okay. Okay. One requirement or one phase. Okay. So there are two things. Yeah. I think that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think broadly, I think you have answered that. So I want all of you to answer the questions because a lot of people are not answering, right? So we'll go one by one. Everybody answer the same question. Same question. Tell me about traceability. Just wanted see the intention is to understand whether you're following through the sessions and all, right? So yeah, go ahead, Avi.
I would say traceability is like how the requirements are linked to each other, and like are they satisfied by the requirements, functional requirements?
Okay, I'll anyway tell you the right answer, but let me hear the other people also. Tell me about this.
Yeah, I think for fulfilling the requirement of the customer or for verifying all the
traceability ensures that the requirement is traced back to the objective which the client has given to you, and I would say that would make sure that the only requirements are delivered, and yeah, the required requirement which client has given to you, that is taken in the process. I mean, it's traced back to its objective for what we are making this.
So I think from the word traceability, you could say that you're nothing but tracing all the customer requirements. You're making sure that you are fulfilling every need of your customer. Like you're tracing everything is going on in the right way. I think that.
I think traceability is the ability of verifying the customers' requirements and which application of an atom, and we should document it. We should document it all the requirements of the customers.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I think it's a documented, recorded identification like that. We should document all the requirements, whatever the customer needed from us.
Okay.
Yeah, traceability, as the name signifies, it's a relationship. It's a matrix that shows the relationship between the requirement and the test cases. Traceability basically here means relationship traceability matrix, RTM, and that's how it.
Yeah. According to me, traceability metrics, it's like, there are three kinds of requirements we have, which are broadly classified as business requirements, user requirements, and solution requirements. Whereas business requirements, it is a high level statements comes under it, like visions and scope, it has been covered, and these requirements, they cannot be directly implemented. So somehow we have to trace it till the solution requirements, okay? And in between, there falls the user requirements, which acts as a bridge between the business requirements and solution requirements. These user requirements, they express how user needs to interact with the solutions to meet the business needs. And finally, there are solution requirements, which depicts the system behavior and the conditions, and they can be directly implemented into the system. So all these requirements, that is the business requirement, user requirements, and solution requirements, they are linked together in the traceability metrics. And in this way, we are able to achieve the fully traceable sets of the requirements. Suppose if the solution requirement doesn't match with either of the user requirement or the business requirement, then that gets removed. And in this way, we can keep track from starting business requirement till the end solution requirements, whether we have covered the full scope of the solution. According to me, that is what is all comes under traceability.
Yes, sir. Traceability, it is the connectedness of scope and requirements among all the project documents. And traceability, it keeps project scope and business requirements in synchronized way. And traceability provides the ability to find the origin of each business requirement in the approved project scope. And you can say that many organizations manage traceability very carefully using traceability metrics. Traceability metric which has a columns for each project document, like scope document, business rule document.
But I think a lot of you need to improve. I think while a few of them have answered it, right? A couple of things, feedback on this question, or rather on it, right? So you're aware of the concept, right? So, but the way you're articulating, you're expressing, or the response what is coming up is still not clear. Expressing your response, right? So the articulation has to be clear, right? So it just doesn't help you if you just know the topic, if you understand the concept, but you're not able to express that, right? From clearing an interview point of view, should be you should be able to articulate it in such a way that you're able to bring across a point that I understand this topic, right? So while I could gather that you understand that, but if you are not communicating it properly, you're not expressing it properly, that would work against you. Okay. Next question. The question is on change management process. So please explain the change management process.
Change management process is something like you keep a matrix to know like everything is going on. Excuse 1 second. Yeah, change management is something like that if there is any changes come up, like if customer tell you to do something change in your process in his requirement, so just to keep every eye on everything, you will use this process though.
Tell me the steps involved in a change management process. What do you do once you get a request from the customer to make a change? What do you do?
I would say first we will ask for a change request form and we'll justify like why the change is required. And
who fills in the change request form?
The customer?
Yes. Okay. So what happens after the change request form is filled in? The next step.
So like we would need to check like what are the changes required and how the cost is related to it, and do the analysis like
we'll analyze the requirement.
timeline and Uh, like is that like goes with the budget and design according to the timelines?
All right.
And
After that,
what would be the impact of it? Are there any additional effort required? Does it affect the time?
okay. Okay. I think that's good one. After that, what do you do? After you analyze the requirement and then you figure out whether you take out or not. So you start developing it.
No. First, we would like ensure is it agreed to be accepted or not, and
I think you send it to the senior management and see if they approve it or not.
What is that team generally called? So we have that.
Oh, this
change authorization board.
Yeah. So some organizations have a change control board. Some call it as change authorization board. So, but there's a set of people identified, right? So you need to be clear of who is that person who is going to approve it. Okay. So yeah, broadly you'll take approval. Okay. So you need to figure out based on the project, team who is basically authorized to take that decision. You'll send it to them. After that, what? Then I think you go on with the development based on the decision. You would either go for the development of it, or if the senior manager says no, you don't have to proceed further. You leave it there.
So the last thing I think we do in the integrate learning and result, and we conduct a closeout and evaluation.
Yeah,
Like
I
that.
think you do that as well, right?
Yep.
So tell me the complete process. Tell me the complete change management process again. So just that I just want to hear it from everyone. So
First of all, I think we have to do the conduct and assessment whether the change is required or not. Then when we
before that,
have
what do
to
you put before that? So when the request comes, how should the request come in? Right? What all details? There's
first of all
something
we
called
have to take the change the form should be filled up by the customers and clients, and then we have to take it to the management and we pinpoint the opportunities. Then in second phase I think we should clarify the roles and uh, establish measurement regarding the change. After that we should talk to the implementation team so that they can communicate with the SMEs. Uh, After that, take action and communicate with the management.
So who is going to take that action?
I think all the I think something I recalling something gap like that gaps.
Right, but are you
Is
going to decide whether the
no
change should be or
BA
not?
should not BA is not responsible. BA is not responsible for changing any kind of process.
Okay.
It's the high level management should
Yeah.
decide.
Right. So I think broadly you're aware of the topic, but work on the articulation, right? So
Yes,
it's not just knowing the topic, but answering it as well, right? So
okay,
you know
sir.
that change request comes in, then you analyze it, then
Yeah.
you send it to the senior management, your change control board for authorization. So they would decide what to do, and then you would pass it. So unless you articulate it, you're trying to explain that, but you're not getting the right words there, right? So
Yes.
work on that articulation.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, Tulsi, your mic is not working. You want to answer that question? Okay. Yeah, I think go ahead with your response. I'll read that and then look at it. Okay. Tell me the next question. Tell me what kind of documents do you read before you start the project? Right? What kind of I mean, how do you start about your requirement registration? Yeah. Akhil, you want to start there?
You first understand what the project is about, maybe from a third-party information, or looking at the document if the project has actually been implemented, depending upon what kind of project. If it's from scratch, then you understand, you meet with the SMEs and you figure out what the requirements are going to be. And that could be done through document analysis, interviews, observation, or focus group, or reverse engineering.
Okay, then let me clarify the question. So I just want to understand what kind of documents you would read before you start your registration. So that's usually would be the first step, right? So is it just the SOW, or you think that any other documents are relevant?
If the application has already been set up, then you read the existing document, existing BRD, and if it isn't, then you read the SOWs.
Okay. What else? What else? What else? Let's say you're putting a project in your resume which says some compliance project, right? Yeah, let's take a compliance project.
Yeah. So, like the case we did, that was about the AMP compliance. So the first thing we do is find out what the compliance requirements are, and we find that out from the internet, maybe, or third-party sources if we can have access to them.
Yeah. Within the organization, also, what documents would be there?
I'm not exactly sure.
Next person. Yeah. Avi?
So I would say, if you are asking for a compliance, then there would be the requirement for the regulatory documents, right?
Right. What else? Yeah, that's definitely there. So Akhil said you read through the SOWs, earlier documents. Then you said regulatory requirements. What else? I'm saying what kind of documents would you refer when you are in the project? I mean, what are the kind of documents which are already available which you can look at to understand the requirements?
The SOPs and...
Yeah, so that's another good source. Standard operating procedures, training guides, or any internal memos which are explaining about. Prototyping, I think we have covered it. So tell me about a JAT session.
JAT session would be something like a focus group. I mean, like you're fulfilling all the requirements. Just like a group, like, you will be fulfilling all the development requirements in it. Like,
who all would be there in a JAT session?
In your JAT session, like your SMEs, you, and the persons who will be handling your project, like the designer, the architecture would not be there. Like a programmer won't be there in the JAT session, but the person who can come up in ideas with, they will be available in JAT session, which would be like your SME, you.
So what do you discuss in a JAT session? Right. So so if you are conducting a JAT session, what?
I mean, you basically when you make planning, how to accomplish your you make sure you do planning basically, how step by step how to execute your whole project.
Then what?
JAT session, basically it is called as a joint application development. Well, it is a very effective method for collecting information, and this information is particularly collected from SMEs in presence of our developers and testers. So here the entire team, whoever is present in the JAT session, they provide their feedback as what is feasible, not feasible, difficult, or to achieve. All this kind of feedback has been provided. Here the BA is there who will just do a requirement elicitation part. That is, his main role can be as a scribe or as a facilitator. Like scribe means he can just collect the information, what all has been discussed in the during the JAT session, or he can be a facilitator, like he'll make sure that the discussion is going correctly on track and not off track. So before this JAT session, the BA he himself has to understand what is as-is analysis he has to do of the system. He has to prepare his questions and also provide these questions to the SMEs first. The agenda needs to be provided to the SMEs so that they are well prepared to understand and to discuss the questionnaires which are going to be answered during the JAT session. And during the JAT session, the BA, he will just note down all the questions and answers to whatever the questions he had for that particular system. And then after JAT session, he will be filtering all the information, and then he would be putting, he would be, checking out whether all his questions have been answered or not. This is actually what is JAT sessions.
Yeah, I would say JAD JAD brings together the both sections in your organization like IT and business to meet the requirements what we have planned, and these people are customized plans to complete what we have actually planned to, and avoid the time which is required to meet the process, and try to reduce the cost and even the errors which take place in a long time process. So basically this combines both sections in the organization like IT and business to reduce the time and money, and there's a whole lot of process taken under JAD in detail in accomplishing that.
Okay. I think broadly, like I said, one broad feedback what I have for most of you is you have an idea about the concept, but it's a problem articulating. So you're not able to clearly say that crisply answer that question, right? So you need to prepare more for your interviews. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
you mean to say we need to be in detail with our answers, right?
Not just be detailed,
Can you tell us
but
what the answers should be, because JAS sessions are basically workshops where all the team members like SMEs, stakeholders, BAs, QAs, testers, everybody is there, and and from that workshop, BAs generally gather all the requirements. My answer to an interviewer will be like this: how should I answer? What is the best way to answer? Can you tell us that?
Yeah. So JAD again stands for Joint Application Development, and so ideally the team members in a JAD would be representation from your business side, from the technical side, and even from the testing side, right? So you would basically figure out what the requirement is and whether it's feasible or not, and you finalize onto the requirement within the session itself. So the main advantage of a JAT session would be that you save on your time, right? So you're avoiding all those back and forth, whether it's feasible or not, and how much time you would require for doing that. So all those decisions can be taken in the meeting, right? Now, the context in which you would generally use a JAT session is where you already have something in place, and then you want to figure out whether some requirement can be fitted into that existing architecture or not. So there, the inputs from the technical team are required. Okay, so ideally you would conduct a JAT session wherein you want to figure out whether that particular requirement what is coming out from the customer is feasible. Or you have what are the various options available to meet that, right? So all that could actually be discussed in a JAT session, right? So rather than have captured the requirement, and then when you go to the development team and then they say these options this cannot be done in this particular way, right? Then you have to go back to your SME again and rework on the requirements, right? All this can be avoided if you actually have a JAD session. So because you have all those various perspectives coming in, you can finalize and then freeze on the requirement right at that meeting itself, right? That way you save on to the time. Okay, so there is no one definition what you should look at. Try to explain that. So try to explain the concept, right? So broadly talk about what it is, and then how would you how would you implement that, and then what are the advantages, in what context would you use it. If you answer all that, I think that's good enough, and it not be a textbook definition that you exactly tell the same thing over there, right? So consider it as a discussion. Try that, consider that, somebody wants to understand how would you conduct a JAT session. So explain it to him. So it need not be a textbook definition that, okay, exactly, this is a JAT session means so and so. All right. So that is what I would suggest. Okay. So guys, I think should we have one more session to complete this, mock interviews? Because I find a lot of your responses are very, at a very basic level. I mean, I would say, you have problems in your articulation, right? So you're not able to.
Sir?
Yes.
Probably I would like to just give a suggestion over here. Suppose like if you give us the questionnaires which you would be asking us, probably we all would, just go through it and then, articulate whatever the answers we have, and then we can discuss. So in that way, everybody would be prepared. This is what I feel.
Right. So, but I've been doing that during the sessions also, right? Yeah. So whenever we cover the topic, I clearly tell you that these are the interview questions. You could get the questions on.
Yeah, you're right. But at the class, somehow we missed that. But it's better, like the way Rupali is saying, if you'll give us a questionnaire and we prepare answers accordingly, if we are in much better situation to speak when the interviewer asks, all these questions.
All right, we'll do that. At least I want you to be a little more prepared, and while I gather that you have a broad understanding about the topic, that articulation is missing out. So you need to work on